First item of business. Did everybody get Thomas's email today about the setting up your server and that kind of stuff and getting patched into? Yeah, like I said, if you are a TA for the university, or apparently if you just work for the university, who was it that just worked for the university and figured out that, yeah, then you are staff.Washington and are using Ovid? I can't remember which one, but here's the dirty little secret that Thomas and I really didn't share with you. There was no real way that we could check to see if you patched in through Dreamweaver correctly. Did anybody kind of figure that out? We just didn't say anything, right? So if you had your first web page up by the due date, then we marked you off for assignments 2 and 1. Correct, Thomas? Yep. So anyway, so was everybody able to patch into their server by now? Yeah? Cool. All right. So last week when I updated my WordPress install and some of the plugins that went along with it, remember how I had that little short code written in the video section? I was able to, it was a curly code issue, like I said, that I just didn't get a chance to fix before class. So my video feed is working again, and we are recording right now. So what we are going to do tonight, if we go back to the schedule, we have a 2-week exercise. So it is January 20th. So we are in week 3, and so due before the beginning of class today was getting your first web page set up. We are now going to be moving on to the exercise page layout for your web page, and then next week exercise page layout for your web page continued, and then week 5 page layout for your web page will be due. So this exercise that we're going to do today is going to span over the next 2 weeks. So if the question is, hey, Mike, what are we going to be doing? So this is basically, if you had this, right? I would like you to do a header level 3 if you could, right? But this is pretty much enough for the first web page. Was everybody able to get that pretty successfully done? Not rocket science, really. Are you guys kind of like, hey, wait, this is way easier than I thought it might be, right? Again, HTML and CSS is relatively easy. It's just a set of markup and a set of instructions to present some markup. When you get into some of the JavaScript and jQuery stuff and the PHP stuff, that's where it kind of gets a little more complex. But right now, it's relatively straightforward. So we are then going to take this, what we are doing here, and we are going to attempt to turn it into this. So remember when we were looking at the good old HCDE website? And I told you guys, you know, the build that we are going to be doing in this class is pretty much your standard build that most websites are typically built using. In other words, if we go back to, or let's just kind of go to an interior page here, and if we look at this, we have our header. You can see the black line around it. We have our navigation. You can see the black line around our navigation element. You can see the kind of thinner black grayish line that is the interior of our navigation. You have then a content area, you have a footer area. So if we were then to go back here, we have our header area, right? Now the only difference between what I have going on in my header area and difference between this header area is this header area is divided into a couple of different columns, if you will. The left-hand column where the logo is, and the right-hand column where the utility links are. But if we go down then to this navigation structure here, it is pretty much along the same lines of a fixed width navigation. Now the difference what they have here is their purple bar extends all the way out to the edges of the browser. Well, to do something like that, right, we could just extend that outer bar, that outer element all the way out to the edge of the browser as well, right, and give it a background color. So in the interior section here, we have our content area, we have our sidebar area that contains the sub-navigation. Again, back in what we're going to be doing today, we have our content area, we have our sidebar area that in this case is going to contain a dummy set of links. And basically what we're going to do, has anybody ever heard of elements in a web page being floated? Okay, so we have our left-hand column, which is floated left, and our right-hand column, which is floated, you guessed it, floated right. Okay, so if we were to then do something here up top where we need this logo over to the left and we need these utility items over to the right, it would be simple as taking this logo, pushing it, floating it left, taking this utility navigation, floating it right. Okay, then obviously down here we have our footer. Down there they have their footer. So kind of what I'm getting at is this design here, and the one extra thing that they have is kind of a feature spotlight, which is basically just an extra element, a horizontal element. That's all it really is. But basically what I'm getting after is, I'm going to say that the new redesign of the HCDE website, visually appealing? Yeah, for the most part. But how is it built? Fundamentally, it's built similar to this. So I guess my point being is, I'm going to teach you how to build every other website that you're probably going to build in your lifetime, right? In other words, we've all come to similar design patterns, and then we can push and pull design patterns any way we want to. But there is, like I said, this is pretty much your standard website build. Really stripped down, but it's your standard website build for this day and age. So that being said, where we're going to start out is, if we look at the lecture size, so if you don't know by now, when you go to the lecture sizes, I do have the view link. So again, you can view it here, like just what I was viewing. And I also do have a code link. Now, when we go to this code link, what this pretty much is right here is, this is the demo I put together while I was writing up the lectures, right? So again, those of you who heard of GitHub, a lot of people heard of GitHub. Again, GitHub is basically, at its bare minimum, it's a code repository where you can post your code for other people to see. At a maximum, it is used as a piece of versioning software where as developers are working together, they can sync their code. In other words, if developer, let's actually go to a Thomas Wilburn, who is a developer at the Seattle Times, who also sometimes teaches at Central. So let's say here that if you have a development team, right, developer A, B, and C, all working on a project together, okay? Now, you might imagine that if you're using this FTP methodology, right, pulling a file from remote, working on it, pushing it back to remote, well, what if A and B pull the same file, work on the similar stuff at the same time, and push it back, right? There's going to be conflicts. In other words, if developer B FTPs his file or her file after developer A does, B has just overwritten A's work without any notification. So when you start working in an environment where you're going to work with individual developers all working together, you're going to use this workflow here through GitHub. But basically, if developer A works on some stuff while developer B and C are sleeping, right, or out having a beer or something like that, developer A then pushes their code to GitHub. Well, when developer B and C get around to sobering up and starting to work on the project, right, what they will do is they will open up the GitHub application, hit the sync button, and GitHub will sync that code that A has pushed to GitHub to both B and C, right? So basically what happens then is developers A, B, and C are all working on stuff together and keeping in sync with each other, right? A lot of times as a development team, you want to work on different areas of different files. You don't want to open up the same file at the same time, so you have to have that good communication. But what if you do? GitHub will keep a record of what developer A, B, and C all did on the same file. Then you can coordinate working out what they call the differences, or diffs. And once all that is ready, then you can actually pull from this server via shell access or command line, pull the latest repo to the server. So that's how version control works in a nutshell. But like I said, for what we are doing, so I'll leave this up. So if you go back and watch it on video, github.com, Thomas Wilburn, ITC 210 resources. I'll see if I can post a link later on. But how I'm using GitHub for this class is just basically a code repository. So as you go through the exercises, now I haven't changed 598. The first quarter we taught this, it was under the 98 label, meaning it was special topics, hadn't gone on the roster yet. I just need to change that to 532 and I have enough to do already, so I just haven't done that. But if we look at then page layout for your website, your web page, or if we go back here to the root of 598, you can see then that I have put all of the lecture sizes here individually in their folder. So if we go to create your first web page and we open up index.html, right? This is pretty much what we did in class. So if you guys at all want to, hey, how close did I get, or compare, there's going to obviously be, you know, every time I do this class, there's a little improvisation, right? So the code is a little bit different here and there, but I'm going to try to stick to what we've done or what I've set up for you guys as much as possible so that you can go and check a resource. No copying and pasting, like I said, from the GitHub resource, type all the stuff out on your own, except when we get to putting in some of the jQuery library stuff and some of the, like I said, I'll let you guys know. But if we then are going to say 598, page layout for your web page, we are now going to have to put an images folder in our folder. But if we then go here to the index file, you can see that today we're going to comment out some of these old settings, which basically is a way for me to show you how comments work in the CSS environment. Again, programmers, right? You guys use comments in your code pretty much every step of the way to tell other developers what's going on with your code, right? Has anybody ever had another developer look at their code and say, hey, thanks for all the good comments. I was able to look at your code and understand what was going on, okay? So it's good protocol, good practice. But again, here is what we're going to be doing today if we look at somewhere to the code. Right now, we don't have any page division elements in our site. But if we had page division elements, or what are page division elements, right? Did anybody hear me last time start with saying, oh, well, we would, to center this or give it a width, we would really give it a div tag? Does anybody remember that? Okay. So in terms of what that looks like is, when we start, well, I don't know how else to say it other than when I look at a web page like the HCDE web page, I look at it from a build standpoint, point of view, right? In other words, header, navigation, spotlight, text, sidebar, footer, right? Text, sidebar, overall content area, right? So if we look then here, header, navigation, no spotlight, but we could put one in there if we wanted to. Content area, text, sidebar, footer. If we look then at the code here that we're going to start writing, header, navigation, content area. Inside the content area, we have column for text, we have column for sidebar, we have footer, okay? Notice that what we are doing as well is, so in terms of how we lay websites out, I'm still fond of using the div tag, right? HTML5 has come around, and now HTML5, what a lot of people are doing is, instead of saying div ID header, they're using the HTML5 tag of header, okay? There is also an HTML5 tag for footer, right? Supposedly, it's supposed to be more semantic. It's supposed to help with search engine optimization. Again, I haven't been convinced enough that it makes enough of a significant difference that, you know, to me, I still think, well, it's a page division. So the tag for what div stands for is division, the division tag, page division. Did you have your hand up or you were? No? Okay, I thought you had your hand up. So, but what we have here is ID header, okay? So in other words, we have an element, and if we go back to building blocks, no, anatomy of CSS, let's see. Classes and IDs. So unfortunately, we kind of rushed through this at the end of last lecture, a little bit too much for my taste. But there are ways that we can call out labels for these elements, okay? The two different ways to call these out are, one is an ID. ID equals sub-navigation items. So when I'm highlighting this, this is basically your element, your tag, your UL tag, and the attribute of ID and the value sub-navigation items, right? IDs are used once per page, okay? So once per page load, meaning not if you use it in a template page here, you can't use it as the same ID in the template page over here. I'm talking about if and when this page loads, I am using then just like clockwork time, 6:17 or so, 6:20. I should take a brief break at 6:20. So again, then the header right, or the element for the header. Right now, we have an H1 tag that says Mike Sinkula's first web page or demo web page or whatever you wrote. So we need to wrap it in a parent element, which I'm just going to use divs for the time being, right? And then I give it an ID of header because, well, it's the header. That makes sense. And also, this is where the header tag, if you use the header tag or the footer tag, the Google machine looks for the header tag and the footer tag for semantic identification. As far as I know, the Google machine will also look for the ID of header and the ID of footer. Again, the Google machine is mysterious in how it does everything it does, but that's the way I understand it. Okay, so basically we wrap it in a parent element that we're using a div tag for, and then we can give it a rule. And this is where if we use ID of header in our style sheets, we use the hashtag or pound symbol or whatever you want to call it to call out, instead of the element OL, UL, or div or whatever, we can simply call something by its ID, right? Give it a width, give it a margin, give it some padding, give it a point. Same thing, navigation, width, right? So on and so forth. We can then also push it further and say, okay, if this is my navigation element, right? I have the parent tag, div, ID, navigation, but then I have children tags or children elements, the UL, grandchildren elements, list items, great-grandchildren elements, so on and so forth. So if I needed to reference this list item within this UL tag, within this div ID, how would I do that? This is where the, remember when we talked about contextual selectors, right? So this is where then this list item in this UL tag, in this identification, right? So let's talk about the cascade a little bit more. So if I say the UL tag in the ID of navigation, well, up here I've declared the UL tag, right? And notice I've commented out all that stuff in there. But if I had not commented that out, and I said width 620 on that UL tag, that's where the width of 620 would be inherited through every UL tag through the page. So if I then said, let's see, I have, there we go, let's say margins. So if I said margin bottom of 10, right? And then I said in this UL tag, or UL tags in the navigation ID only, overwrite existing margins, make all the margins back to 0. Okay, so that's how the cascade would work. This comes after that in the chain of events, if you want to say, right? And this says, well, I'm going to change this from that to this. Okay, so that's how the cascade would work. Now, the other way to call out, where'd it go? Anatomy of style sheets, there we go. The other way to call out an element is by giving them a class. So this paragraph element has a class of red text, okay? So if I said then used the period signifier and said now anything that has the class of red text, right? So let's say I said I put class of red text on a list item element, right? And I used just period red text and said, give it a color red. It would give that list item a color red. But if I called it out p.red text, it would give only paragraph tags that have the class of red text associated to it. We'll get into classes a little bit more down the road, but these are ways of, remember when we talked about the document object model, right? So let's say a JavaScript file needs to look for the elements, all paragraph elements that have the class of red text. So in the document, look for the paragraph element that has the class of red text and do whatever you need to it. So that's how the document object model works, okay? All right. So like I said, that's unfortunately what we didn't get to last time. So now, yeah.
So quick question, maybe I missed that, but how do they defer from their web UI?
How do developers use them, you mean?
ID in class.
So ID is once per page. Class, you can do multiple times per page, right?
So you can put, so on the, in your example, you had it on the UL,
Yeah.
UL tag. If you also put that same ID on a paragraph tag, it would only happen once then?
In my experience, when I've done that accidentally, the world doesn't end. But it's not appropriate. Let's say it like that. In other words, you're not going to get an error that's going to destroy your web page.
Best practices.
Best practices. Now, you will even encounter developers that say, oh no, you should never use IDs. Has anybody ever encountered somebody like that? Thomas, have you ever encountered developers like that?
I wouldn't say developers, but some people go by that kind of rule.
There shouldn't be that chair there. Let me move that.
Just everything should be, their concept is everything should be repurposable.
Yeah.
In a way.
So there are developers that say, oh no, you shouldn't use IDs, you should always use classes. And when it's been explained to me in terms of like the point system and how the weights and measures and the physics of it all work, I was thinking, oh, okay, that sounds logical, but it's identifying an element to me. So I can't, again, unless the world blows up, unless I get errors, right? You have a tendency to just be like, okay, well, that's your practice, and in your heavy-duty JavaScript world that you're in, maybe that makes sense for you guys. But in my world, where I'm just trying to lay out a web page, I'm trying to identify the parts of the web page: header, navigation, content, footer. So therefore, it makes logical sense to me to use an ID. You know, and it works, and I've never seen a downside. And so, bleh, right? I'm going to keep doing it. I don't know what else to say, right? But you, just a heads up, if you ever run into a developer that's like, I don't use IDs, I just use classes, you shouldn't use IDs. They exist. Now, are they right or wrong? I don't know. Am I right or wrong? I'm going to say I'm kind of right, you know? I'm right-ish on what I'm trying to do. So
Well, you're teaching the class.
I'm teaching the class. I know a lot. That's what makes sense to me. I have a master's degree. I'm going to do it that way. Okay? I don't know, you know. So we're going to do it this way. And if you learn other practices, in other words, my global point is there's a bazillion and one ways to do something. Everybody has their own workflow. Everybody has their own idea of what's right and what's wrong. Have a debate about it. It's helpful.
Could you give us an example of how you could use classes multiple times on a page?
Sure.
Or just talk us through it?
Sure. I can do it right now. Let's do the red text thing. So if I needed some kind of something at two different places for two different elements, right? In other words, if I needed, this red text example is a good thing, right? If I needed to call out something red because it's super important, right? You know those people that everything is in red text, it's all important, right? But let's say that bullet 2 needed to be emphasized, in this paragraph needed to be emphasized. Well, how would I go about doing that? Would I, if I needed to just make something bold, right, I would do this. I would put the strong tag on it. But there's no tag to make something red. There's no red tag, okay? So the only way to do that is to give it a class. So I save that, and I go back to, whoops, my demo here, and now this paragraph and that bullet only are red. Now, if I would have then said, only paragraph elements that have the class of red text. Only then that paragraph, okay? I could go even one further. This is probably not the most ideal, but if I said red text, color red, so I'm first calling out anything that has the class of red text, it's going to be red. So both the paragraph that has class red text and the LI that has class red text are going to be red. But then if I say only paragraphs that have the class of red text also be 36 pixels. They're both red, but only the paragraph is 36 pixels. Did that kind of answer your question?
It did, yes.
Yeah. Okay. That was easy. So I am going to back up a little bit to just, let's leave the red text in there. Why not? Again, this is the improvisation, right? Okay, so eventually we are going to, in what we're doing, need to adhere to a grid. Okay, so this grid system that I'm using is called the 960 grid. So if we are, we'll create an image folder here in a second, but if we go to this see also 960 grid system, who are my print designers in here? Anybody? Who's ever used InDesign or Quark or PageMaker? Great. In InDesign or Quark or PageMaker, you can set up the page column structure, page columns. Okay, same thing. Where in web design, we're using columns, but we don't necessarily set up a guide structure like you would in Quark or InDesign or PageMaker or one of those. So what I have a tendency to do is this background graphic, those columns are 100% stolen from this website right here, right? Therefore, when I am doing something and editing a website that I'm working on, I have a tendency to stick with the 960 grid system 12 columns. So here is my blog. And it is designed to the 960 grid system. So if I were to inspect the middle section, in this case, if we look at page elements, right? So what I just opened up by right-clicking is most browsers come with their own inspection tools. So basically, if you ever want to see how something is built, you can inspect it and kind of hover over IDs or hover over elements, right, to see, okay, great, I'm hovering over the ID of menu. So in the ID of menu, it is visibly showing me where that ID is in space on that website. So here then I have a div ID of content that you can see is over to the left, right? And I have an ID of sidebar. Let's bring this up a little bit more. An ID of sidebar, which is over to the right, which is in a parent element of, a lot of times I use the ID of middle, right? Header, footer, what do you call the stuff in the middle? Middle, right? Some people like the term main, right? There is also a main tag that does not work universally around browsers just yet. But if I looked at this middle tag, and I went over here to inspect the CSS, I can see that it has a max width of 940 pixels, margin 0 auto, margin top -7, padding 1030, which if you see shorthand like this, this means top, right, bottom, left, okay? And for those looking at home on the YouTube video, I'm pointing at the screen right now to this, and you can't see what I'm pointing at. Okay. So here, though, I have this images, background, 12 columns, PNG, that is, again, 100% ripped off from the 960 grid website. Don't tell them. But if I uncomment that out, what you can see then is how this 12-column grid system aids in laying out my page, right? So just by using some widths and a column structure, you are going to go from that really amateur-looking website to a much more professional-looking website, right? Just the same way of if you're doing print design, flyers, brochures, whatever, and you're not using a grid system, then you start using a grid system, you are going to go and be that much more professional. But we can see this image. This image right here goes over to columns. This sidebar goes over 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. This paragraph text right there, or this gutter, is 20 pixels. This paragraph text right there is aligned directly onto this column. Okay? So this grid system definitely helps me out. Again, 960.gs. If you go back to the home page of it, right, you can actually download some files that work in InDesign and Illustrator and Omnigraph and some of those other programs. If we go here to the dimensions and say view demo, that's what we were just using before. So this is where some of the measurements that I use today are, remember when I said there was a reason why I use 620? This is the reason why I use 620. Oh, got a point on my thing.
The arrow's kind of right there.
Yeah. I know, but I'm trying to get in good practice of doing that, is what I'm saying, right? So here then is the 620 column, copy column. Here is the 300 sidebar column. So if we go back to this, right, from here to there is 620, from here to there is 300. They are probably using a 1200 grid, but I would bet that they're using, if they did use a grid, a 12 column grid. But nonetheless, that's how you get some of the measurements of what I've got going on. That's where the measurements are coming from, right, is this grid system. So the first thing that we want to do is steal this graphic image. So instead of going here and trying to steal it, what I've done is I have put a download background 960.png, but the first thing that we need to do is we need to put that in an images folder, right? So if I go to the good old hard drive, school, 532, and I open up my 216 folder. Right now, all I have is the index.html, and I have the really annoying notes folder that Dreamweaver makes. There is a way to turn that off in Dreamweaver, but we'll do that later. So what I want to do, or what good practice is make a new folder, call it images, lowercase. Let's start getting in the habit of no uppercase, no title case when we're making folders and file names, okay? So, because HTML is case sensitive. So now that we've done that, if I go back to Dreamweaver and I hit this refresh button, oh, it did it before I even hit the refresh button. So there I have my images folder. Let's go ahead, and if you are in the lecture size for today, and you go to the download 960 PNG and you just click it, you're going to be like, where is it? It's a very, very thin, I think it's actually a 1 pixel tall image. So instead of that, right click, save link as, wait for the pinwheel to spin. School, 532, 216. You're building at the root of yours, so in your HTML folder. Then in the images folder, save. Okay. I have a tendency to use a labeling system if in my themes and whatnot, I will label things whether they're a background image or a content image, right? That's just my labeling system. You don't necessarily have to adhere to it, but there it is. So let's talk about images real quick. So here in the lecture size, if you go and click on the using images, I believe I've already got that opened. So when I first taught this class as a lab to 537, we did a Photoshop logo for ourselves, and it was kind of impractical and somewhat of a waste of time, but still it was a good graphic for a demo of, well, how do we use images on the web, right? What are the file formats that we use on the web, okay? Has anybody ever saved an image for the web out of Photoshop or Illustrator using the save for web command, right? Now apparently Photoshop is like, that's so old, we have to put that under a legacy tag, right? Who's noticed that, right? But I still want to use it. Don't tell me how old I am. I know. I already know, okay? But whatever, save for web. You can see here, and I'm not going to open up Photoshop, but you can see here when we have something on, I'm assuming everybody has used Photoshop at one point in time or another, and you've seen possibly the checkered squares background, which means what you're seeing here is a transparency for this layer, right? So what are the file formats that you might want to save? I am going to still pronounce it GIF. I don't care what the author or the guy who actually made that file format says. It is not graphic image file. It is graphic image file. He wants to call it GIF. It annoys me. Pet peeve. Okay. Graphic interchange formats. Graphics, so GIF files are limited to an 8-bit palette, 256 colors. They were really suitable at one point in time for doing logos, right? They rendered the curves of the logo type very crisply for some reason. It was the main file format for that kind of stuff. As the world progressed and the world progressed, we found that, has anybody ever made a transparent GIF file and looked at how crappy it is in the transparency aspect, right? In other words, the squares that render the curves, you would have to, they're still opaque. They're not transparent, truly transparent like a PNG file. But up until Internet Explorer 6, no, Internet Explorer 7, Internet Explorer 6 and below did not support PNG transparencies. So a lot of times we were still stuck with a transparent GIF file, okay? But nonetheless, GIF files were 8-bit color palette, 256 colors. Typically, we don't use GIF files any longer, right? They're a little old, they're a little outdated. JPEG, Joint Photographer Experts Group. Basically, they updated it to 24-bit total, and they were great on the compression for photographic images. They allowed for thousands and millions of colors, I think, right? Photographers still like JPEG format, right? I prefer the PNG graphic, right? The portable network graphic. It supports 24 bits. You can also make it 8-bit, meaning in the background here, right? This is an 8-bit PNG, this background file. Because if it were a 24-bit PNG at 1920 pixels wide, that would have been a really huge file to download. So by making it 8-bit versus 24 bits, it's a graphic in the background. You can sort of still read that it says fuck it all there, but you still have to work at reading it, right? This is a reminder for me just to not take life too seriously. And I play guitar and drums, and I used to smoke. I don't smoke anymore. I quit a year and a half ago. Yay, right? Etc. So images, using images. So I typically use the PNG file at 24 bits, which supports 16 million colors, and that's what, if we looked at stuff in my portfolio. Let's go to print. This is saved as a 24-bit PNG. Why I like PNGs as well is this file right here is reduced in size. In other words, if I said open image in new tab, it's actually a little bit bigger than it appears there, right? So what I had to do here was, because I needed to do this responsively, right? And as we come in, eventually it starts to shrink a little bit. And then at a certain break point, it snaps out bigger. In my testing, the PNG file works better, right? Now, when we're talking resolution, call me old school. That's fine, you know, if you want to. But I still save images at 72 pixels per inch, right? Because, well, my computer here, the display is at 72 pixels per inch. And when I look at something on a retina screen, yeah, it looks a little sharper, I think, but I can't really super tell, right? File size matters, you know, especially when you have lots of graphics that need to download. And lots of graphics that need to download possibly in a rural area that still has slower connections. So yeah, you could go up to, what's Retina, 92 pixels per inch? Even more than that, isn't it? I don't really know. What? Thomas?
Retina for which device?
I don't know, what's an iPhone at?
Like a couple hundred, 200 at least.
50 million pixels per inch?
Yeah, a lot.
Okay, a lot of pixels per inch, right? I don't know, I still use 72 because of file size download accessibility stuff, right? And if you're in the HCD department and you're worried about usability and accessibility, that's just kind of what I stick with, okay? There are two ways that we can use images in our web pages. One is by using the image tag. Now, here's a really unfortunate, irritating thing. When I updated this plugin a while ago, sometimes it gives me, instead of the caret, it gives me that little character. I've tried my damnedest to fix it, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I sort of gave up and went. So, but using the image tag, right? Meaning, down the road, oh, I don't have an image in that one. Let's go back to what we did last year, because we are going to put an image in our about page. So here was the graduation a few years ago. There I am sitting right there. But nonetheless, if I inspect this, this is a content image, okay? Meaning it is an actual element that gets placed into the content area of the page. Therefore, it uses the image tag. To pull said image tag, then you would use the source attributes and give the location on the server of where it lives. So this is an absolute path versus a relative path right there, okay? Meaning, if my HTML file is in this 215 folder, I could use a relative path and just say images, image graduation.jpg. But if this was sent via a newsletter, an email newsletter, and somebody is reading this on their computer that is not pulling from your server, right, it's downloading into your email, they then need an absolute path to load that image where it actually lives out there in the HTTP universe, right? But one way, shape, or form, this is an example of an image tag, and we will eventually put an image in our about page down below, but we're not going to worry about it now. The other way to use images is backgrounds, right? So again, if we went back to my blog, this image that you see fixed in the background is actually set, so body, class, home, blog. In the style sheet, the body tag has a background that pulls then from the images folder. It's fixed top center, okay? So what we're going to do here is we now need to position that 12-column grid in our body tag as a background image. Ready? Have I talked enough? Let's actually start typing. Okay. So, if I refresh this, now I should see this in my images folder. And again, in my 216 folder, you would just have it in your HTML folder. Now, do yourself a favor. With this highlighted, put it to your remote server. Because if you write it up in your style sheets to pull from the images folder, it's pulling from the images folder on your remote server. If you forget to upload said file to remote server, that's where you will get the little broken image icon or question mark, or whatever device you're on will display different things. So first item of business is to do that. So if again I expanded this, oops. There it is. Really? Are you going to remember that I had my other monitor up? It basically positioned that window to my other monitor, which does not exist right now. Let's see if we can bring all the front, bring all the front, bring all the front. Window. Ah. Well, if I do this, if I change this to remote and go to the remote server, there's the index file, there's my image. Going back to local. So now, let's place our background image into the body tag. Background. Now, when we go and we type in background, we have a few properties associated with background. We could just use the background property and use shorthand to call everything, but because this is an introductory class, we're going to use longhand so you learn the principles. So what we are going to do is say background image, background position, background repeat. Okay? Let's start out just by saying background image. And we can say, let's actually browse for it. .216, images, background 960, open. Okay.
What if you drag and drop from
I don't know. Let's take a look. Background image. Nope, that'll write you an image tag. So if you're doing a content image, that's what you want to do. Or you can just write it out, URL, parentheses, images, EG 960.png, semicolon. And I'll erase the one, I'm going to live dangerously and erase the one that I did not type out myself. So I save, and if you are on a Mac, right? If you have not, how many of you have set up automatically upload on save? Okay? If you have not, again, you can either use that button, or on a Mac it is Pretzel Shift U or Command Shift U to put to the server. So now if we go and we preview this, what's happening? Well, I thought there were 12 columns. Why are there a lot more than 12? Who can tell me? Take a guess. It's repeated. So I have not specified a repeat. So it is going to, you know how, remember in the back of the day, you used to see somebody would put their beveled and embossed, pillow embossed logo in the background, and it would repeat all the way, and it looked really amateurish, right? So if I place a background image in my web page, by nature, it is going to repeat X and repeat Y, okay? So I only want this to repeat Y, because this is where, like I said, the file, if I said background repeat and I said no repeat, saved, previewed, where'd it go? Well, it's way up at the top and it's only 1 pixel tall, so we don't see it. If I go back here and say repeat Y, repeat Y only. Now I have my 12 columns, right? But by default, it is positioned all the way over to the left. Background position, center. So this is both positioning its horizontal center and vertical center. Okay. I could position something to the top left. I could position something to right bottom, so on and so forth, right? But for now, we're just going to say center, and this, in other words, I could do it like this. Top right. And it's going to position itself, the original image, to the top and to the right, and repeat Y. Okay? I could also say top center versus center center. So now, like I said, you can't really see it, but it is originally positioning itself to the top of the page and then horizontally center and repeating Y. Okay? Now, let's talk about our page divisions. So, like I pointed out before, I'm just going to use the div tag from here on out, right, for some of these things. We can talk about, like I said, when we get there, some of the HTML5 tags, but in order to not confuse you terribly a whole lot, let's just use regular good old div tags. But you can see here, I have a tendency to, when, let's say we, yeah, that doesn't have any No, let's go to the schedule. Let's say we view page source. How organized does this look? Really super organized. Good job. Right? So what I have a tendency to do is maybe I overdo it, but I use HTML comments to say what's going on in my page so that, well, let's put it this way. If you have never opened up somebody's HTML file that they don't use comments, has anybody ever done that? Right? And you're like, where is that closing tag? Who's ever had that slam dunk? Anybody? Right? Playing the game of where's that closing tag? Ask your developer friends if they've played that game. They'll tell you, right? So instead, I use a lot of comments to block out and organize my code. Maybe it's because I was trained as a traditional graphic designer. I was that kid who, when he was 12 years old, took the graph paper and laid out his room, right, on graph paper and did all the measurements. Anybody else do that? Or was I just a weird kid? You did it? Sweet, okay. So I was that kid, right? So it has then transferred into, if we start doing page divisions, right, here's what we're gonna do. I want to separate out and put my H1 tag into a header, okay? So to do an HTML comment, we start off with caret, exclamation mark, 2 dashes. Now when we do that, notice what's happened, right? So if I then hit save and publish this, bang, where'd all my HTML go? Okay, so if you don't want something to render on screen, you can comment it out as well. Okay, we're going to go back here, and I'm going to say begin header dash dash closing caret. Oh, my HTML is back. I'm going to type out div ID equals header. I'm going to close said opening div tag. I'm going to go down to the end of the H1 tag. I am going to write closing div tag. Now, there is also good practice of, and sometimes I'm really good at it, sometimes I don't follow it as strictly. But if you want to visually tell somebody, let somebody know what is the parent and the child element, I typically just hit tab. Okay? Now, again, programmers, who are the programmers in here? 2 spaces, 4 spaces, what's your rule? Tab, 5 spaces?
Tab, be consistent.
Yeah. Okay. So you'll have whatever shops that, again, be consistent. So if this is a shop where we always use 2 spaces, use 2 spaces, right? So sometimes you'll get places that do 2 spaces, sometimes 4, sometimes 5. I typically just hit tab and call it a day.
Any programs that bring that option?
A what?
I don't know if that's actually something really, I've used an in-house built tool. For the HTML like preprints that push a button, it'll index for you everything, all parents and sub-parents.
I'll bet you that feature is in Dreamweaver.
Okay. It's up there in Google, I assume.
Yeah, no. Yeah, you know, there are a lot of development applications, right? Dreamweaver, brackets, Sublime, Eclipse, blah, 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 blah. And everyone has their own functionality. Here, you can see a button, right? And it, I think, does 4 spaces, right? Yeah, I'll bet you that functionality might be in Dreamweaver. I've just never used it. After the closing div tag, I am then going to say end header, right? So now we have started blocking our elements out. Let's go ahead and make 2 more elements. Around our text, I'm going to say begin content. And last year, note to self, I used different ID names that I had written out in the lecture notes. Don't ever do that again because people got confused. So I'm going to use the exact same ID names that I have written up in my notes. So content, div, ID equals content. We are then going to go down to the closing UL, say closing div tag, end contents. Now, this is where, oh, look at that, I got an error. So Dreamweaver is really good about calling out errors. Hey, look, you got an error in line 87. Well, line 87 looks okay to me. Let's scroll back up. You got an error in line 73. Sure enough, I didn't put the ending caret on the opening tag. Once I do, the red has gone away. Now, just like I tabbed over this H1, I then have these tags inside the content div, which I am going to highlight like so and hit tab, and it is going to then push them over. Okay? I don't have a footer yet. Womp womp. Right? Let's make one. Begin footer. Open up div. ID. Footer. Close opening div this time so I don't get an error. Close div tag. And footer. Right? Now, in the footer, I'm going to open up a paragraph tag. And what is the copyright symbol? Option G, right? Who's with me? You're on a Mac and you're in Word or Illustrator, Option G. Well, in the HTML world, instead of Option G, we use what are called character entities. So if you start typing the ampersand in Dreamweaver, it will give you a list of character entities. Like, if I chose ampersand AMP semicolon, that's where it is going to render. So if I look at that now, that is where it's going to render an ampersand. Okay. So here in my using images, right, this right here, the ampersand LT, what's actually happening there is whatever the plugin is doing or not doing, I go back and type in ampersand, right? it is then giving me the opening caret and the closing caret as character entities. That's the error. Like I said, I've spent hours on trying to fix it. Hours and hours and hours, right? You eventually just give up. But what we want to do is find the copyright symbol. Character entity for the copyright symbol is ampersand, COPY, semicolon. So if I say copyright 2016, Mike, Sinkula, anybody speak Spanish? Right. When I was in high school, I went to an all-boys Mexican Catholic high school in East LA. I had red hair, freckles, and acne, and the last name Sinkula. Right? People are speaking Spanish are like, oh, you poor son of a bitch. You have to embrace it. You have to embrace the, if those of you that don't know, Sinkula, sin means without, sans. Kula means, kulo means ass. Kula is the female. I just have to get that off my chest every time, right? It's still, I'm still working through that. Okay. Yes. So what we're supposed to be talking about, if I go back here and I hit refresh, now 2016 Mike Sinkula. Now the one thing that we also did not get to in terms of our elements is we didn't do a text link, right? So let's do a text link. Around Mike Sinkula, I am going to do an anchor tag. Okay, I am then going to end that anchor tag, right? So if we talk about links, we go back to our schedule. Oh, links is next week. Oh, well, I'll open it up anyway. Who cares? Typically, what we do for, we'll just do a short talk about this. Okay. So we use the anchor tag, right? And we use the attribute href. Okay. Then we can say HTTP blah 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 blah, right? So if I've got my blog open, and I'm just going to copy that. You guys can, let's put it this way. If you say href hashtag or pound symbol, okay? This is the way of doing two things. Have you ever seen a website where you click a link and it goes down the page? What that is actually doing is that is going to a named anchor. Okay. So if I did something like, I want to send you to the level 2 header. And I say name level 2. If I now said href hashtag level 2, I haven't done this in a while, hopefully it works. Maybe it doesn't, it's not long enough. But that's how you would send something to somebody on the page if you have a really super long page, named anchor. That's just a kind of an aside. I wouldn't worry about that. I'm going to Command Z through that. But I am going to paste, whoops. So again, if you are linking to a URL, you are going to use the whole HTTP, et cetera, absolute URL. You can also link to, let's say you just had a PDF file on your server somewhere, right? You could just go find an example of that. Let's say you do the HCDE program and you thought of yourself as a spy, so that you could then teach a usability research methods at a community college. And you had assignments that then you wanted to give your, oh, that's a link to a Google Doc. Let's see. Competitive analysis. So let's say you wanted to give your class an example of a PDF file, right? So here you can see I just made a link to a PDF file that is on my server. So it will open up in a new tab as a PDF. It's your PDF, Thomas. I'm trying to embarrass Thomas. He's not falling for it. It's been with,
After last week.
yeah? Dude, you were totally, you know, no, yeah, that was pretty tough. Yeah, we got through it though. Yeah. And nobody worried about it. I've forgotten all about it. Yeah, it is on video. That's the unfortunate part. I've always been hesitant at videotaping, recording my lectures because the amount of cuss words I use during the lecture as well. So, okay, going back to here. So let's just say now we have footer, save. And we refresh. Okay, so now we have our elements, right? And now we have a link to my website. Why is it purple? It's not because we're at UW. It's purple because if you don't specify color on your links, and we'll get to that down the road, it will pick up the default Google link colors, right? Or just normal blue, which means link, and then if you click on something, purple is visited, okay? And we'll talk down the road about how to make those colors. But if we go back here, great. I put elements in there, but it looks exactly the same. Why does it look exactly the same? Well, we put markup in there, but we didn't tell that markup how to behave at all, right? So let's finish off tonight by giving directions to our main header, content, and footer elements, okay? So first thing we want to do is, like I said, we put in some specifics that we just don't need any longer, but we did it just for learning sake purposes. So here is where this is a good example of, if I don't want my H1 to be 620 pixels any longer, let's actually do the paragraph tag, because the paragraph tag has a lot of content in there, right? I can do one of two things. I can manually hand type out /* and just like the caret, exclamation mark, dash dash is an HTML comment, the /* is a CSS comment. Some of you that are programmers also might recognize the /* as a multi-line comment in the programming. Multi-line, I think, right? If I then go to the end here, */, and that is now commented out. So if you are ever wanting to just explore different things, but you don't want to delete and then retype and delete and retype or whatever, you can simply comment something out like so. And if I then go back here, now elements, because this paragraph element is a block level element, okay? If I don't give that element a width, or I don't give its parent containing element a width, it is going to attempt to render itself out 100% of the page, right? So if I then bring the browser window in, it will also wrap, go out all the way and wrap, okay? Notice the background file moves with the browser screen because it's positioned top center. So what we want to do right now is let's go, and I also want to, on the paragraph tag, I want to get rid of the margin left. So in Dreamweaver and in a lot of the programs, if you highlight something like this, there is this button, Apply Comment. Very, very useful. Whoops. And it'll ask you, what type of comment do you want to apply? HTML, the multi-line programmer's comment or CSS comment, or the single-line programmer's comment, right? And I am going to say the /* comment, okay? So I'm going to go back up to my H1 tag, and I am on the H1 tag as well. I am going to comment out the width. I am going to comment out, yeah, on the H1 tag, I'm going to comment out all the margins. And if I want to do multi-lines like this, I could select multi-lines like that and as well comment that out like that as well. H2 tag, I only want to comment out the width and the margin left. On my OL and UL, the width and the margin left. Leave the padding left in there, okay? So if I go back here, now, because remember what we did is we did our CSS reset, right? The star selector, which means every last element on the page. We gave it a margin 0 and a padding 0. Again, if I commented that out to see what it would look like if it didn't have that CSS reset, remember that each browser has its own default margin padding. So therefore, whatever Chrome's margin padding is, it kicked this over a little bit. Again, we as developers don't like that, and so we do our CSS reset. So what we want to do is we want to give some style to the header. Hashtag. Oh, look at that. It asks me, which ID do you want to use? That might be new. I've not seen that before. I'm just going to type out header, curly brace, curly brace. The first thing I want to do is show you guys how I visualize stuff in space a lot of times. Certain developers do things differently. Some developers give a background color to the element. I've always been in the habit of doing border 1 pixel solid magenta, right? For some reason, I don't know where I picked up using magenta. Maybe it's from my CMYK print days. I'm not sure. Cyan, magenta, yellow, black, CMYK. But if I do that, then I will see how that element is behaving in space. Now, a pink line with a pink background, a little too much pink for me. So I'm going to change that from black or from pink to black, right? So when we are doing colors like this, and this is shorthand. Remember when I said in terms of the background, we could use shorthand or we could do longhand. Border, if we typed out border, right, you would see that we have, do you mean border bottom color, border bottom left radius, border bottom, border, etc., right? So instead of saying border, let's see, weight, border width, 1 pixel. Border style, solid. Border color, black. We can just do shorthand, 1 pixel, solid, black. Now, black is also the keyword for using colors. I could very well, instead of saying black, use the hex color. So if I, when I'm doing colors, if I type out the hashtag or pound sign, because Dreamweaver is a relatively highly featured, that's not the way I want to say it. Dreamweaver has a lot of features in it, right? One of the features that Dreamweaver has is, well, what color do you want, right? And you can see here, hashtag 000000. Again, the people that are at home don't know what I'm pointing to, right? I could say, even shorthand, 000. And then it says, you mean 6? Sure, why not? Whatever. So there it is. Let's talk about how the box model works, right? Because what I want to do is I want this box to sit in the center of the page, and I want it to be 960 pixels wide, according to the 960 group. Or what I typically do is, if we go back to the 960 grid, I actually like using a 980 grid. Well, what do I mean by that? If we look at any one of my pages, and you look up at the top of the page, and you see here 980, 12 columns, right? Basically what I'm doing is I'm using the 960 grid, but with the 960 grid, they are putting 10 pixels of margin on each side. I don't like it. Not enough space for me. I want 20 on either side. So, how you calculate this? 60 pixel column times 12. 20 pixel gutter times 11. Left margin 20, right margin 20. You have yourself 980. Trust me, I did the math. Width. Now, for now, we're going to use fixed pixel widths, right? We'll talk about relative units later on, but for right now, we're going to use fixed units, right? Pixels, inches, points, centimeters. Width, 980 pixels. So if I do that, it is now, with the border there, making my element 980 pixels wide. How do I get it to sit in the center? Margin 0 auto. So this is shorthand. Really what I'm saying is zero auto, meaning top margin, right margin, bottom margin, left margin, clockwise. Trouble. Top, right, bottom, left. Okay? So if I said top margin, 20 pixels, right margin, auto, bottom margin, 0, left margin, auto. Auto is the way that basically what you're saying is, I have a fixed width element. I have said 20 pixels margin top, right? And because it's the first one in the chain, I'm not getting the collapsing margin issue that we were talking about. So 20 pixels of space up top. I have 0 on the bottom, so there's no margin, no space on the bottom. But if I wanted to say, I want 40 on the top and 20 on the bottom, right? Because I've said auto left and right, it is basically going to move with the browser screen. Meaning, if this is a fixed width, what's going on out here, right? Auto. It's just a way of centering something in your page. You may have heard of text-align center, right? Or if you want to make text centered. So let's say on red text, I then said text align center. That is a way that I can get my text to be center of line instead of left. I could also use right and justify. But if I don't specify any text alignment, it defaults to left, okay? But when you want an element like a div tag to sit in the center, I don't think it works. I'm used to being surprised a lot of times when I say something and something changes. So everything I say, I'm 99.9% positive about everything. There's always that one time. Doesn't do it. It basically centers the text inside that H1, right? Because in terms of inheritance, I've said header, text align center. Well, the element isn't text. The H1 tag is text. So that H1 inherits what you said on the div tag, right? So it's not what we want. So now, oops, we have margins, 40 top, 20 on the bottom. Okay, and notice again, I made the width 980, so you don't see in the grid file, you don't see the extra 20 pixels out there. There's no marker in it, but I have 20 pixels on either side. Well, what if I want to then, just like here, set this text, so here I have 30 pixels instead of 20 on the outside. So let's say I want to set it away from that edge, 20 pixels, right? So meaning, what if I want to set that M to that grid line right there? What do I do? What? Padding. Padding. 20 pixels. So if I just say, I could say padding, in other words, I could do this. I could call it out like this. Padding left, whoops. Padding left, 20 pixels, right? So I could be specific. If I called it out as just padding, 20 pixels, it is going to do top, right, bottom, left, 20 pixels all the way around, okay? What happened?
So if you write adding 20 pixels in all of them, and then you do adding left afterwards, and write 40, you'll overwrite just that one. Because it's the next thing on the list. Is that true?
Top, right, bottom, or left? Which one do you want? How big? $30? Sounds great. You don't see it, but it's only given the pattern. I mean, because there's just space here, it looks like it did something different. But it, yeah, basically what you're saying is, I'm going to write this as 20 all the way around. But on the left, I want 130. It'd be the same as writing 20, 20, 20, 130. Right? So yeah, you're getting, in other words, you're understanding the cascade. I like when people understand stuff that, you know, kind of validates the whole teaching thing. Right? So if we go back here, what happened? Why is that not lining up? Let's talk the box model. Okay? Here's what happens. Content, padding, border, margin. One would think that if I added padding, if I said width 980, and I added padding of 20, that it would still be a visible width. In other words, if I went in on the content div, and you guys are going to need to do this on the content div, but you don't have to do it right this minute. We are just going to, well, let me do that. I wrote it once, I can copy and paste it. It's my rule. If I erased margin and padding on content, oh, Command Z does not, save is what I want to hit. So on the content div, I'm saying width 980, margin 0 auto, meaning top 0, right auto, bottom 0, left auto. My content div now is 980 pixels wide. But I've also said on the header 980 pixels wide. So the way the box model works, or let's say the default box model, we are going to see down the road when we get to responsive images how to adjust the box model. Right? If I am taking padding 20 pixels of the left and the right, I need to subtract that from my width. So my width is 940 pixels plus padding left 20 plus padding right 20, which equals 980. That is the annoyance that is the box model. Now, when it came to standardization, I believe, or according to Thomas Wilburn, my friend who is the developer of the Seattle Times, that's one of the things that Internet Explorer originally got right. Internet Explorer originally didn't do the box model this way, right? They did it where you didn't subtract padding out of the width, right? We'll see down the road when it comes to responsive images and doing percentages, this box model is really cumbersome on images. Now, who's ever heard of Bootstrap, right? Bootstrap, what they do is they do something like this in the body tag, or we could say in the star selector. Box sizing, border box. If you set it to that, it will not subtract padding out of the width. Okay, but I'm still a little bit leery, or I haven't made the jump to doing that in my star selector just yet. And all my lectures in this class are not written to that. We'll discuss that on images only down the road, but I just want to point out that that does exist. So if you are ever looking at, how many of you have started inspecting websites now, looking under the hood, looking at the code? Anybody? Yeah. And if you see a website that is either built using the framework of Bootstrap or Foundation, they use that box sizing border box. Because when it comes to responsiveness, right, when you're saying this element is 100%, oh, except for this padding, well, then you have to calculate, okay, really it's 96% plus the padding, et cetera, et cetera. But if you then turn the box model and do it that way, you can say, no, everything including the borders and padding is 100%. Does that make sense? Because if I said 100%, I would really be talking about from here to here. And when you get into doing responsive images, and you have padding and borders around your images because you're framing it, right? That's where you're like, oh man, if I have a 4%, if I have a 4 pixel padding, oh, you can't do borders and percentages, so you have that 1 pixel. And so my thing is off by a pixel, and that's going to kill me. Who's that anal with their work, or that much of a perfectionist? I can't sleep tonight. It's off a pixel. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. It is 7:50. Last but not least, well, let's leave it like this. You should have now header, border 1 pixel solid black, width 940, margin 0 auto, or top right, bottom left, padding of 20, right? And so on the content, let's put padding of 20 as well. So that, oops. Right? And we're going to have to change the width to 940. And on the red text, I'm going to get rid of the text align center because that's going to annoy the hell out of me. But I'm going to leave red text there. And then I am going to, on my footer element, do the same thing. Border, 1 pixel, solid, black. Width, 940 pixels. Margin, 0, auto. Padding, 20 pixels. How many of you are thinking to yourself, well, if he's being consistent with border width, padding, margins on these two, why doesn't he write it like this? Meaning, what I just did was I did the multi-selector. Sometimes you'll see when people do multi-selectors, they do it on one line like that with a comma, like we did with the OL and the UL. That gets hard to read. So a lot of times people will do it like this. So how come I'm not doing it like this? How come I did it like that?
You can change it independently.
Exactly. Eventually down the road, we're going to start changing parameters or settings independently. Exactly. All right. So next week, we will work on putting the navigation schemas together. So this video should be up soonish.